This is Amy Adler with Lucid Palette. I teach acrylic pour and watercolor here in my home studio in Loveland, Colorado. I was going to sit down to paint and thought I'd take just a couple minutes to share one or two ideas about watercolor paper. So, like any budding artist, when I started watercolor, I started with a very affordable paper, and that was fine, right? And invariably I got frustrated, and I'm going to show you why here. So this is just an early little feather I did from a tutorial, and if you look real close, you'll see some like really hard lines in here, and the watercolor didn't absorb into the paper well, and so that is one little example, but this one's a better one. This is a bird I did. Listen, neither of these are like terrible. I'm probably sure I threw away the really terrible things that I absolutely hated. But this was an example of changing the light to dark values on this nuthatch. So here we have a light value, lower, mid-tones, and then the darkest value for this painting. And, the texture's interesting, and it's not a terrible little bird, but the values here don't transition well, okay? And I'm going to show you in contrast, I have this other bird that I was learning to practice on. And here we have light to dark transitions. A little too dark. I didn't quite get the values right or the feet, but that's not what I'm getting at here. It's so easy to be critical. The transition here is much smoother. So if you put the two things side by side, part of this was technique, but most of this was about paper. When I first started with watercolor, of course, I started with something like maybe a mixed media paper, which you'll see here is 98 pound, 160 GSM. That's grams per square meter. And the way they get those weights is they weigh, I think, 500 sheets of paper, and then that's the weight per 500 sheets of paper. I'm showing you the thickness there, and really highlighting that when I first started, I started with 140 pound, 300 GSM, and it said watercolor paper. So I thought I had great watercolor paper, but my results still were coming out like the bird, right? I wasn't getting what I was hoping to get. What I learned was that even though I had the 140, 300 GSM, I didn't have 100% cotton. And so you'll see that on your paper. It's written directly on the pad, and that's what you should look for to get really good results. I'll show you the difference why here in a second. This is watercolor block. So it comes, I was looking for that. It comes in a really thick, there's like a glued edge here. This holds the paper down so that it doesn't have buckling. Watercolor block is probably the most expensive way to buy really high quality paper. So you see here, 100% cotton. Once I learned that, it was like the whole world opened up. This is a much thicker paper. This is 300 pound cold press. I would talk about cold and hot press. Cold press is a little bit more rough texture. Hot press might be a little bit, smoother, but the water responds differently. In any case, this is a thicker paper. This is that 300 pound paper, and this is 140 pound paper, and you can see the difference in the thicknesses. This one's more like cardboardy. This is where most of us start. Now, you can also buy it in these pads, right? So Hanamiel is one of the ones that I found to be more affordable when I was starting. I like the pre-cut pads, but they are more expensive this way. So you can just buy a pad. This is not glued down, and then you would tape it down. I have this one out because, look, this is a nice gradient. It was practicing skies, right? What these reminded me to tell you was that when artists start, one of the most affordable ways to find a high quality paper and be able to experiment with it is to buy large sheets. They're 24 by 36. You can get them at an art store, and then you cut them up into like manageable sizes that you can experiment with. So let's do a quick comparison. I did these at the same time. On the left hand side you have the Canson watercolor 140 pound. On the right side you have the Hanamiel 100% cotton 140 pound. And so on these side, these are the same technique. I put a line of dark paint and pulled the color down with my brush. Here we have a much nicer transition. The water tended to sit on top a little bit, and so I got this like tooth-like looking thing. Over here, we got a lot of backwash. The water didn't flow into the paint as well, whereas here we have this kind of nice, soft, we got a little bit of that. I probably tilted on in both cases. But this one, you know, didn't go outside the bounds, and it was just a more smooth surface. On this one, what stood out to me was this is Payne's Gray. It has like a bluish undertone. And the gray here kind of separated out in a weird way. And so I could give you a whole thing about surface tension and how watercolor paints dry and, you know, when the particles settle into the paper, and that's probably what did that. And here we just didn't have that. It dried more evenly, and we didn't get a lot of separation of the colors there. On the left side here, these are blooms or blossoms. They're super fun. I love adding them. Excuse me, but I don't always want them, right? Some artists hate them. I use them in landscapes or, you know, all kinds of fun ways. But on this side, and then here I tried to lift the paint. On this side, the bloom's okay, but you can tell it ran up against the edge, and didn't. This one's just very pretty. I'm going to have to cut that out and put it on a magnet or something. And then both lifted pretty well. Arguably, this side lifted a little easier. By lifted, I mean I took my brush and scrubbed and pulled the color off by scrubbing and dabbing. And so there you have a comparison. And one thing I realized I didn't do, and I had put a little water on here so that I could show you. And, you know, I didn't actually warm up any paint here, so let's get some paint going. By warm up, I mean get it wet. So I've had the water sitting here for a little while. I wanted to see what would happen. And so we're doing that live. And so here's the Canson. I probably don't have enough water on there. But you can see we're getting a little bit of the pulling the paint, which is what I like, you know, one of the ways that I like. And even though I put these on at the same, oh, see, this one's got like, can you see the line of water there? And this one just isn't doing that. And see how the water absorbed a little different? Now, it also meant that this one had a little more, and if I pull it this way, watch what happens. The water is going to go through and pull that on that side. Well, I'm kind of at the edge, but see, this is why I'm getting bloom. See how that puddle is sitting on top? And here I'm just not getting that. So you can get a really good sense if you compare those things. The reason I talk through this with folks before we have a class is that we're going to use the higher quality materials here. I want you to be successful and enjoy the process, and struggling with materials is one of the biggest roadblocks that I think people are, you know, they're interested, but anyway, come try it out. I'd love to have you join a class. You have access to the links. They're all over there somewhere. So I hope to see you soon.